This conference will now be recorded.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Kendall's informed me that we have a quorum, so we're going to get started. Kendall, could you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Brian Yonta. Dave Wegman.
Here.
Thank you. Derek Bays.
Here.
Thank you. Doris Cooksey. Thank you, Doris. Debbie Reed. Thank you. Neffy Garza.
Present.
Thank you. Kara Tackett.
I'm here.
Thank you, Kara. Jeff Carroll.
Here.
Thank you. John Beasley. John, I see you online. I'm going to count you. Suzanne Scott. Thanks, John. Suzanne Scott. Present. Thank you, ma'am. Jose Reyes.
Here.
Thank you. Dave Mock.
Here.
Thank you, sir. Donovan Burton.
Here.
Thank you. Marty Kelly.
This is Carly Rotzler stepping in for Marty.
Thank you, Carly. James Blunt.
This is Chris Robles for John Blunt.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Jamie McCool. Jared Bowen. And Miss Anita Machiavello.
Here.
Hi, Anita. Thank you for joining us. Chair, we do have a quorum today.
Thank you, Kendall. For item number 2, public comments. Kendall, has anybody signed up to speak?
No, sir, no one has signed up to speak.
All right, thank you. Next item is approval of the minutes from our last Regional Flood Planning Group meeting, which was on August 8th of this year. Are there any comments or discussion?
Dave Wegman moved to approve.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, motion passes.
Aye.
Next item is communications from Water Development Board. Anita, it's all yours.
Hi, everyone. I just have one quick update. On October 2nd, we sent out communication regarding guidance for amending the 2023 regional flood plans. We have prepared additional guidance on developing amendments to your 2023 regional flood plan that best align with the upcoming 2026-2027 fifth cycle. The deadline for submitting amendments has changed from January to April 1st, 2025. Please be sure to read through our guidance package carefully. We've also posted that information to our website. And that's all I have.
All right, thank you, Anita. Are there any questions or comments from the board or from the group for Anita? All right. Next item for the chair report, only one item to report on. The contract between the Water Development Board and the River Authority, we have fully executed that contract, but Sarah, we are still going through the contracting process with HDR, the selected contractor, but we should be good by December. Right, Ron? There we go. Thank you, sir. No pressure. No, but that good progress, and so I think we're all comfortable. It's just the contracting process. Next item is item 6, discussion and appropriate action to fill the existing vacancy for the municipality's interest group. So we posted the solicitation on September 10th. It closed October 14th. We only received one application total. Just as a reminder or refresher, this is the position that the city of San Antonio was previously filling. We received one application from Sabrina Santiago with the City of San Antonio. The executive committee, we did not convene since we only received one application. And we do have an action required, but I'm happy to open it up for any comments or discussion. Definitely.
Chair, if I may, having known Sabrina for many years, I can tell you that she has a very good reputation being in the position that she is. She works quite a bit with the development community. Having worked with her for some time, I can tell you she has good character, strong technical abilities. While she is not a PE, she does have a really strong understanding of floodplain issues. She's an acting floodplain manager for the city, delegated from Mr. Husseini. And I'll tell you, she is, I think she would be an excellent fit for this group, given our situation. I would completely endorse her.
Thank you, Nefi. I will just say from the River Authority's perspective, I've interacted with Sabrina some, and I know the Sarah staff interacts with her frequently. It's always great, always good, very good relationship, and nothing but positive things to say about her. Any further discussion or comments? Yeah.
I've known Sabrina as well for many, many years. On my time before I joined the city of Bernie, but then even since coordination wise. So yeah, I think she'd be a great fit for this group.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, if there's no further discussion, I'll look for a motion.
I'll move to accept, and I guess what do you want me to say? To appoint? Okay. I would move to appoint Sabrina Santiago to the vacancy for the municipalities.
I second that motion.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right. Motion passes. Kendall, please welcome Sabrina. Reach out to her and we'll get her up to speed. Next item is item number 7, presentation from the River Authority on future flood risk data for San Antonio's west side from Daniel Perry. Come on down.
Thank you, guys. Do I have control over it on here? Okay, cool. This will be interesting. This isn't how I practice, but we'll see. It's okay. I have confidence in myself too. So, oh yeah, this would be, this is exactly how I practice, just like that. So hello everybody, my name is Daniel Perry. I'm with the San Antonio River Authority, and I'm here to discuss our project on Westside Creeks, a 2D model, and our step towards future flood risk data for that for the area. So the Westside Creeks, they're in a central portion of the San Antonio River watershed near the headwaters of the upper San Antonio River subwatershed. The creeks are within Bexar County and to the west of downtown, obviously, and they feed directly into the San Antonio River south of downtown. This is a small portion of the San Antonio River Basin, but it is a very important portion of it because of the development in the area and the flood risk that we do have in the Westside Creeks. So the Westside Creeks themselves consist of 4 different streams: Apache Creek, San Pedro Creek, Martinez Creek, and Alazan Creek. They convey about 45 square miles of urbanized watershed and produce flows of around 60,000 CFS, cubic feet per second, flow at the downstream portion of the San Pedro Creek. The project limits include 2 of the historic reservoirs within San Antonio, Elmendorf Lake and Woodlawn Lake. And this area has been developed for many years, with much of the development happening in the late 19th century and early 20th century, which is a large portion of why we see a lot of these flooding risks in the area because of development practices. So we do have multiple existing studies in the area. We have a 1D Upper San Antonio detail. We have multiple 1D models of the Upper San Antonio River Basin. And these are detailed models because they incorporate structure data such as bridges and culverts, and also survey data into the models themselves. We also have a Texas Water Development Board 2D BLE model, which is a lower level of detail, not including structure data, not including survey, but it is a 2D model of the Upper San Antonio River Basin for the area. And we try to incorporate both of these studies as much as we can into the Westside Creeks area, or project. So we have multiple project objectives with this project. One of the main ones is to develop an efficient approach for preparing these models and document any challenges and recommendations that we have out of the process. We know that FEMA's future modeling strategies are going from 1D to 2D, so we want to make sure that we're prepared for it. And we want to be able to effectively leverage the decade or plus worth of data that we've developed creating these 1D models. And we also want to make sure that we have a feasible approach whenever we start converting these models to 2D. Another objective was to create 2D data. We developed two different scenarios, lumped hydrology, which is where we apply flows directly to the channel itself, and rain on mesh, which is where we're applying precipitation to the entire watershed or to the entire project area and allowing the model to run. We want to be able to document, we wanted to be able to document the challenges and the benefits of these approaches and any other observations we may have. And we also wanted to compare these approaches to the 1D analysis that we've done and the 2D BLE analysis that we did in our past, or that the Water Development Board. So another objective was to define and categorize flooding from creeks, which we're calling fluvial, and overland flooding, which we were calling pluvial, and be able to develop a process to separate the two, because we know that rain on mesh is creating, whenever it does run, it has both overland and creek flooding within the model itself. And it'll allow us to define mitigation strategies based off of these two different types of flooding. Our final objective was to identify future climate impacts throughout the Westside Creeks, which help identify future planning areas of concerns. We took the worst case scenario of the 100-year flooding event for 3 different time horizons, the 20-year, 40-year, and 60-year time horizons, and we modeled it to see the impacts of the flooding throughout the Westside Creeks. Now, these results can help leverage the future flooding impacts into community regulations and codes, and also help identify areas of mitigation strategies for these higher risk areas due to the future flooding. So we leveraged as much as the existing models as we could. A lot of it was from the 1D models and some from the 2D BLE. We incorporated the 1D data through our structure data through an automated process, which condensed the structures and also shifted the data to be able to incorporate directly on top of the channel, which makes a more efficient or a stable 2D product. We also ran the scenarios through the 2D models, lumped hydrograph and rain on mesh, and processed the data once those scenarios are run. And after we ran the scenarios, we did see significant pluvial or overland risk in the Westside Creeks. As you can see from the image on the left there, there is significant pluvial risk throughout the Westside Creeks. And after we ran the two scenarios, we incorporated all the future precipitation into the models and looked at the results. So as you can see here, these are the two different types of two scenarios and the results for the 100-year existing precipitation. On our left, we have our rain on mesh results, which is where we took the precipitation and applied it directly to the project area itself and allowed it to run through. And then on our right, we have our lumped hydrology, which is just applying the flows directly to the channel and again, allowing it to run through. As you can see, the results for the rain on mesh is showing a lot of overland flooding, but also showing that overland flooding is actually accumulating and creating channelized flooding in some areas that we didn't see in our 1D models and we don't see in our lumped hydrology models also. But also for the lumped hydrology, which is the closest analog that we have to 1D, we do see more accurate, or what seemingly more accurate split flows throughout the Apache Creek area, which you can see to the west of, to the east, sorry, of Elmendorf Lake, and then towards the south of Apache Creek near the San Pedro confluence. So we know that rain on mesh necessitates the need for boundary identification. So we developed a process an automated process to identify that floodplain boundary. And we compared the boundary that we created through that automated process to the 1D floodplain and then to the lumped hydrology to make sure our assumptions were correct. But this also helps us identify the different types of mitigation techniques that we could have compared to the types of flooding that there is along this creek. So specifically, if we see that there's more overland flooding, we can develop a mitigation strategy that would be better for overland flooding. And it also helps us identify where the vulnerabilities are outside of the channel banks. Now, there are a lot of benefits of 2D analysis, but one of the main ones for this analysis was that it provides this skeletal structure of a model that we can easily incorporate new data into, run it, and get those results and analyze those results. So for this one specifically, we created that skeletal model for the existing flood or precipitation, and then we ran all the future flooding through it, and we actually were able to see and compare each of those different scenarios pretty easily after we ran the model. We also, now RAS has storm sewer in it, so we can easily incorporate storm sewer into our 2D model, more easily incorporate storm sewer into our 2D model. And if needed, if you want to check or look at mitigation strategies, you could change terrain in the 2D model, run it, see what impacts there are, and also look at land use changes or anything to that effect easily incorporate it. So once we run those scenarios, you can analyze the data, see what's changed from the floodplains because of it, and adjust your mitigation and design techniques to help that. And in turn, this helps us become a more resilient community because of this ability to easily look at mitigation strategies throughout the area. So I'll let this run. This is just it going through, showing kind of how the overland flow is, or the channel is leaving, or the flooding is leaving the channel and overland flow through the neighborhood right there on Elmendorf. And this is the 100 years, so that's a good amount of houses that are being flooded. Now, take into mind this isn't incorporating storm sewer, so that could have impacts in the area. So we know that the water, for that analysis, we didn't incorporate storm sewer. So that, yes, we're assuming no storm sewer. At this point, RAS wasn't able to incorporate storm sewer analysis, so we didn't incorporate it. So we know that the Water Development Board is working on an approach on how future climate should be accounted for, though the analysis isn't complete. We wanted to incorporate our future flow or our future precipitation into these models to look at the impacts of the floodplain. So these floodplains are more for demonstration purposes only, and they aren't really here to establish future climate floodplains. But we can see that based off of this future flooding in specific areas, there are significant impacts to the width of the floodplain. It is growing, obviously. And you can see that based off our 60-year future climate, there could be upwards of 390 acres of floodplain added to the floodplain. So this helps us, again, identify where these future risks are and helps us really focus our efforts whenever we develop mitigation strategies off of damage centers on future goals. Another benefit is identifying how we can incorporate freeboard based off of our future climate impacts into our community codes and regulations, and see how many houses we may take out of the floodplain just based off of elevating them by a foot, 2 feet, and compared to what our future floodplain impacts will be. So that's my presentation. If y'all have any questions, I'm happy to answer that. Yes.
Debbie, can you use the mic, please?
Daniel, so I'm assuming that, like, going back, if you don't mind, to
Yes.
slide 13, where you've got almost a whole river going parallel to the creek, or another creek parallel.
Is this
13?
the slide 13? Oh, this one. Is that the right one? Yeah, these numbers are off. I'm sorry.
Don't
I'm
worry.
looking at 13 on.
We'll just talk about it. But I'm assuming that looking at the flooding, the pluvial flooding that's happening, local flooding that's happening in this area, that you would be able to identify areas where BMPs could be implemented.
Yes, that is the goal. But also updating the model to become a better, more robust model is another level that we're trying to get to, where we can incorporate storm sewer. But that is the goal, is to utilize this data, which is identifying areas of flooding that we weren't able to see before off of 1D, and be able to actually use strategies that can mitigate some of that flooding and hopefully provide relief. Yes, Yana?
So I got several questions, but
Yeah.
I'll space them out. First of all, great work. Thank you. I mean, I think it's really exciting, the growth in the modeling that y'all have been able to do. I want to congratulate y'all on that. I am curious though, although, obviously some of these are impressive to see, but I mean, without the storm sewer system, it's not really giving you an accurate, I mean, some of that may be happening underground. I mean, some of that water that we're
Maybe
seeing
going
here
underground,
is
yes.
underground in the system. And,
Mhm.
and I guess, so I like Debbie, I mean, obviously if the sewer system was not mitigating this, then, obviously, or if there were some ways to put BMPs upstream that could, slow it down, take some of the
Exactly.
volume, but so that there is some timing change into the storm sewer system. All that I think is very interesting. But I guess my question is, the floodplains are still regulated by the river flooding only?
Yes, 1D models.
So-
That's how and I'm not certain if FEMA is going to go towards 2D regulatory floodplains. I know that sometimes they go through the process, the LOMR process, a letter of map revision process, where you can actually create a model off of 2D and use it as a regulatory floodplain. But the majority of models now are 1D, yes. But even this, just to give kind of like a preface on the storm sewer, if you were to remove a foot or two of flooding in these areas, you still have pretty significant flooding. So the storm sewer might have capacities, but I don't think they would have the amount of capacity to.
Well, I'm just trying to understand the regulatory aspect of
Yeah.
of the floodplain. When you mentioned, 300 some odd home, well, that was with the climate.
390 acres of added
308.
floodplain.
Okay, but you said something about homes before you got to.
Yeah, so
in
like
one of them you said there was some
in this model, we're showing that there's like, I'd have to look at the regulatory floodplain, but in this image we're showing more homes are the homes that are being flooded by the overland flow in this area. But none of those are necessarily added to the regulatory
Right.
floodplain. But I do know in this area the regulatory floodplain is still pretty wide, and some of those homes are actually in that floodplain.
Okay.
Suzanne, Chair,
Go ahead.
if I may. The regulatory floodplain, the local floodplain administrator will make that decision. So in this particular case, it would be the city of San Antonio. So whatever the city of San Antonio tells FEMA, this is the floodplain we will adopt. City of San Antonio could choose to adopt the 2D model, and that would be up to the city to make that choice. If you were in the county, unincorporated area, then it would be the county's responsibility to make that decision. FEMA will divert that to the local floodplain administrator.
I was the question about all of the overland flow and whether that's going to be mapped and regulated is kind of a national question. And where FEMA is landing right now is what you said, just the riverine flooding or the traditional effective floodplain would be regulatory. But they are rolling forward with additional flood risk data that is this more wide scale. And what they're saying so far is that it will be informational and to use for decision making and wise decision making, but it's not going to be mandatory purchase for flood insurance. It's not going to be in the floodplain regulations for now.
But the city,
If they want to adopt it, they could. Yeah. Yeah.
And could then do your codes, your building codes, et cetera, using that information as best available data.
Right. So if you recall, the city of San Antonio actually regulates to the 100-year future conditions, or ultimate, as the city calls it. So they have opted to go above and beyond the regulatory floodplain. So that's why the city and actually the county as well will have their own, they'll make their choice of what they want to regulate to.
Daniel, were these models based on ultimate development or existing conditions?
This is existing conditions. We do have a future though. We do have a future scenario.
Okay, well,
So-
how did you, because you're looking out, years, you're doing a 20-year projection or a 2020, a 2040, whatever. I mean, there are things that you can quantify and things that you can't. You can quantify what happens with a fully developed watershed. You can quantify various things of that nature. I always get really uncomfortable when people are trying to quantify climate change, and reaching out to a certain distance in the future. I realize the purpose of this, and you're kind of doing a worst case scenario, and let's see what happens and who might be at risk. I think that's still a pretty controversial issue.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, we saw what happened in North Carolina. So having that future tendency, that was, I think, the 1,000-year event. So having that future worst case scenario ideas can allow us to, or can prepare us a little bit better to mitigate, and not just mitigate but react, because this could also inform emergency situations.
Yeah, I would look at it more as a what if, and not so much as a this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, this isn't set in stone for sure.
Just a couple of questions. First of all, great presentation.
Thank you.
Good job. And I echo what Suzanne says, modeling has come quite a bit from back in the day. Couple of questions, obviously understanding and having run some of these kinds of models. If you can talk a little bit about a calibration. Models are great when you just put information in there, but once you begin calibrating, particularly to this area has experienced some pretty significant floods, both in 98 and 2002. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then the second part of that question, I guess probably be more for Derek, is are we seeking, because it's being presented in this forum, are we seeking any funding for this Westside Creek? That'll be the second question.
So for this model specifically, we calibrated more towards the flows that we had in our 1D models and towards what we've had previously, not necessarily calibration based off of historical events. We didn't incorporate historical events in this model, but the flows we obtained from the hydrology models, HMS models, are calibrated.
So you're calibrating to the FEMA existing and not so much, because the FEMA existing, I guess they did do some calibration to the 98
They
storm.
did calibrated
okay, that makes sense.
based off of the flows for the HMS models. They have 3 calibration events and 2 validation events for the HMS models themselves.
Are you asking me with my Sarah hat or my Region 12 hat?
Both.
No, but those are potentially 2 different answers. Because my Sarah hat that's the city's responsibility.
Yeah.
We provide the data. You're intimately familiar with that. We, the city doesn't have a rep here at the moment. But we from Region 12, I don't think we could have done any more encouragement to get them to put projects in. They did put a number in, but not all of them that we were hoping they would. Hopefully in this next cycle, I think we'll have another opportunity to get them to push for that. Again, putting the Sarah hat on, we are happy to support, but this remains a city's responsibility, or with county support if they chose to do so. But I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of questions. What would I apply for funding for? Is there, there are a series of projects, but this is new data. Is it further modeling? There's a potential number of things that we're happy to have a discussion about, but those are pretty broad.
This model has been shared with the city and the county, but the city is taking on a study and they asked for our 2D model. So that's been shared with them. The purpose more of this presentation, part of it is, maybe we should have mentioned, it was performed with a grant from FEMA, and part of that grant was to share the information and just spark conversation about the new technology that's coming around, how it can inform decision making, and the flexibility of looking at these what if scenarios.
I think this is, thank you for that response. I think it's real critical because as you may know, one of the big items that we've been dealing with in our committee with the city has been another area that is kind of the similar vintage of this, and it's Conception Creek, where we see very similar type of flooding that I think not only the council district, but certainly Public Works would be very interested in learning and understanding. There has been a lot of pushback from the community, and I think it really has to do with, and if I can say it, I mean, I think there's been some inability to communicate information properly, or I think there's been more of an issue of communication that I've seen. That's why I'm asking this, because I think it's not isolated to just Conception Creek. It's really, we see this in other places, and that's kind of the nature of my
Yeah,
question.
and I think the difference between what Daniel presented here and Conception was that Conception was prompted by the change in the flood maps, and that drove that particular discussion. Whereas this can help inform, but it doesn't automatically drive that change. I agree with you. Yes, there's multiple areas in the city that this hopefully will prompt more conversation. I think the challenge remains with so many, as us and so many communities, is funding. We're just within the state of Texas, we're competing. I mean, Ron's going to talk some in our next agenda item about the whole list of priorities, but $30+ billion worth of needs that we know probably doesn't capture everything. And so we're competing for dollars within the state. The city, I'm sure we've all read, as they went through their budget process this year, they were making tough decisions in certain areas as well. So it's a matter of informing and educating, continuing to advocate. But money is going to be the big driver for, and I don't know what the solution is. I mean, I know the city is struggling with what is the solution in Conception Creek, ranging from tunnel to one big, detention area to smaller detention areas. Like, it's all on the table, and they're trying to navigate the needs and thoughts of the community too. So yes, more money is absolutely critical, but this helps inform what to target and how, I think.
So Derek, given that these West Side Creeks, in this particular case, the Corps of Engineers is engaged, historically, they have indicated that they've done all their flood improvements on West Side Creeks. I mean, now you're moving into restoration, some of the other things. But given this new information, given this new data, and new modeling techniques and the things that you're able to see, would they consider looking again at the flood benefits, or because they're moving into the restoration, they really wouldn't want to go back? And I'm just trying to get a sense of their role, given these West Side Creeks and that these have been federalized through the Corps.
I think it depends on how you want to tackle that. I think if you look within the existing flood channel and the work that they have under design right now, it's very difficult to do much without going outside the channel. You are bound, so you have to look outside the channel. They're probably, I will not speak for the Corps, and I will just not voice the official, Sarah. My personal opinion as a former Corps officer is that they will continue to push on with their project, because if you stop the ecosystem restoration, you lose the project completely. And so I think that's the danger. But the reality is you have to look outside, and I don't mean taking houses. I should be very clear about that. But you can't. The channel is not wide enough right now, and you have to go outside. And so, is there an opportunity to talk to the Corps and our delegation about like another study to take new information like this? Because the West Side Creek channels right now are 80% of the 100-year ballpark. To look outside, yeah, I think there's an opportunity to push for. We have new information. What can you do from a bigger perspective? But in terms of impacting their current project, I don't see a lot of success there.
One more quick question, and either one of you. Anyway, so looking at that data that you have, especially the 2D, can we break those up into smaller? Do you know where the pluvial is coming from, and can you put them into smaller sub-watersheds
You could create sub watersheds off of them. Most of the 2D modeling, they're trying to actually create bigger watersheds and then base it off of that. A lot of what FEMA is trying to do is kind of create this system where you take kind of a little stamp out of it,
Yes.
grab it, do your mitigation strategy or your development, and then put it right back into the model. And that's the goal.
Other questions for Daniel?
Can I just ask I guess just to update me, maybe Aaron, on, because I haven't, been engaged recently. So the way that the River Authority operates with any new flood information that you provide, the flood maps, et cetera, is that for the city of San Antonio and Bexar County? Is that still the base information that they're using as they make decisions about projects going forward? Everyone's using the same data, flood map data, best available data, whatever label you're gonna put on it. That's still what's happening right now, correct?
For floodplain areas. Yeah, the modeling data is in D2MR, and that's the source for everything. As it gets into storm drain areas or more local drainage, then that moves away from our data set. And then they'll have their own studies for that.
Okay. Okay,
All
thank
right.
you.
Thanks, Daniel. And thanks everyone for the discussion and comments. Ron, next item, presentation from HDR on Region 12's 2023 flood risk reduction solutions and how it ended up in the state flood plan.
If that flooding, it could.
All right, so jump right in. So a couple of things that have happened since the flood plan was, the plan was adopted, and HDR was actually contracted by the Water Development Board, and our GIS team developed a state flood plan viewer. And so the link of here is on the slide, and I urge y'all to take a look at it. I'll open it up here in a second. But it allows you to go in and look at each region, look at all the data that's there, floodplains, storm drains, dams, levees, whatever information they have. And it also lets you look at the project locations and gives a little bit of information on that. So with that, I was going to, real quick. Is it ready to pop up, Kendall, just on this one? This one is where for the, it's too far for me to see. Oh. Where's the viewer? Yeah, viewer's up at the top. Yep. There. So I'm gonna turn around so I can. Yeah. So you can zoom in again. You can see all the regions as you zoom in. Obviously, it's kind of like D2MR. Some of y'all been on that, and the other viewers that the River Authority has. As you zoom in, you get more information that you can turn on. The entities has a lot of different information on the side. You can actually go to your region. Gives you some statistics there on the side, and talks about the number of FMEs, FMPs, FMSs. So just wanted to give you a little bit about that because, but your real question was talking about the rankings and different things. So another thing that's on the board's website, which we provided you a link to, is this massive spreadsheet that has, this is the FMP spreadsheet. And and only reason I'm showing this to you is just so you can know that you can go get it and look at it. And this is a sortable spreadsheet. You can You can sort by the region. You can grab everything that you want. You could grab region 12. Oh, it's enabled. Okay. Yes, this is all ranked. I'll show them at the end. So you can go in here, grab your region, grab a sponsor even. Since you were at the top of the list, Jeff, I'm gonna keep you. And then you can scroll over to the right and see all of the projects. They did some normalization, and so the latest rankings are here. Then you can even come in here and you can sort this highest to lowest. So a lot of cool things that you can do in this. You can come in here and you can look at which ones are the ones that scored best with all the different ranking criteria. You can see the ones that you know. That were just for, like for Dave, just for Bear County. You can see the ones that you had shared between counties. You can see all the different entities throughout the region. So I couldn't begin to start giving you all the statistics, everything. So I wanted y'all to be able to have this, so y'all could go home, take it, grab what you want. But I will hop back into the PowerPoint and show you a couple things. So here we go. The Region 12 had these are the rankings, but I do want to bring up one thing. These are the final rankings for the current fifth funding round. We did find a discrepancy in the rankings, in the ranking spreadsheet, and the Water Development Board is reviewing that, and it will be updated for the next round. It bodes very well for those low water crossings. It bodes very well for low water crossings. Some of the ones in our region went from ranked in the 200s to within the top 50. So those will change for some people. We had. This is the total number of FMEs that they had. Yes, they ranked from number 6 to 2000. And so, I mean, they had. I mean, each one of these 49 had a ranking.
We'll go into later slides that show individual evaluations
Yeah,
and projects.
it'll pull some of these up. Yes, this is the total number of rankings all. That's FMPs. One, yes. So this is FMEs. You can kind of see here, and these were. Here are some of the highlighted ones. Here are the top 14 of the FMEs that were in the region. And you can see their ranking and their cost and who the sponsor. Again, some of these are going to get much cut off for. We don't know yet. We don't know yet. We anticipate it's going to be probably within top 100.
And again, that's speculation.
Yes.
WDD hasn't said it.
that is wide speculation by a bunch of people. That's me averaging what all the things I've been hearing. But yeah, I would think somewhere in the based on money, somewhere in the top 100 is probably the sweet spot for now. But we think that again, we think some of the rankings are gonna. No, we have a few that again. There's a few FMEs on the list that once the rankings get improved for the next go around, you're going to see those significantly increase. So.
It was pretty difficult to do their system and know what your outcomes and who you're going to be able to serve.
Absolutely. So the one thing that we obviously know this was driven by, right? Everybody's looking, well, what's driving this? the number one thing that's going to get every time is structures in the floodplain, right? Structure, structure, structure. If there's a lot of structures in the floodplain, that's going to drive it, and lives impacted, people impacted, right? Those were the two things that obviously weighted the most in this, which is the intent of the flood plan, right? Is to protect lives, property, people. So they did that. But I think we've learned a lot about these projects and how to put these, what's taken into consideration. And I think, we will have to take a deeper dive into each one of these FMEs and FMPs to make sure that we accounted for everything that is important. Because, that's going to be, a large part of our time and money and effort through this next round is identifying more FMEs, more FMPs, and making sure that the ones we got are good and solid, and we need to get updated data for.
Well, because now we have evaluation criteria, which we did not have when we started this process and submitted our draft plan. So I think that just helps inform where we need to focus a lot more. Yeah, Nephew.
Question, Chair. One question for you, Ron, is how much or I don't know if you can tell, but how much did the benefit cost ratio or analysis play into this? I've had some conversations with Saul up at the water board, and they actually, at the TFMA that was held here, they talked about the BCA analysis and even published some new some data on how to do it. The question that I had for him was about because a lot of our areas happen to be in low income neighborhoods. So did that play into this from what you're seeing? Did the BCA have an impact on it? And if so, it didn't. Not at all. Okay. All right.
It is a criteria that they were using. We didn't know how they were going to use it for the funding part. And to this point, we still really don't know. Before it had to have a BCA of greater than 1, and it doesn't appear that it's sticking to that. And I think they're in a roundabout way. I don't think it's directly. It's not like you get 5 points for being above 1 and 0 points for being below 1. I think it's in the ranking, but the weighting, again, structures, lives, all of that.
Well, certainly when you do a BCA, the structures and lives also obviously brings that up.
Absolutely.
But the question that was really driving this was because we're dealing in neighborhoods where maybe the cost of the structure may be so low compared to over where Mr. Reinhardt lives, where the cost might be a little bit different. I'm kidding. I'm joking. It doesn't flood. Then they would cause a discrepancy in that, and which would make the BCA go lower. So that's kind of what the nature was. The water board, at least from the folks that I was talking to, seemed to indicate that they were looking at guidance for us to potentially. I don't want to say arbitrarily, but in a way to help with that fact, the social benefits of that. That's the reason, the nature of my question. That's why I was asking, because obviously we don't have enough projects on there.
Yes, and it really followed the FEMA BCA toolkit, and they provided some guidance around that. But I think in the ranking, right, is where they really went in, and because how do you put a ranking to loss of life, miles of road, number of flooding events, right? That's all in the scoring, right? So I think they did a good job into that as far as taking more into consideration. So a project that, if it's a low water crossing that's inundated and it happens all the time and it impacts a lot of people, was, able to, after some scoring issues were fixed, they were actually able to score comparably to just inundated structures, right? So they tried to find a way to balance the frequency and all of that to kind of go through.
Hey, everyone, this is Ludovine, HDR. I'm tuning in virtually, but I wanted to chime in and just let everyone know that the ranking criteria is on each of the downloaded spreadsheets. There's a tab there that says ranking _ criteria. So you can actually see what everything was evaluated on for these various projects. And for your question, there is social vulnerability that is accounted for. It's about 5%, and that's from the project details spreadsheet. So they categorize social vulnerability into different ranges, and those ranges had different numbers, and those numbers were then multiplied by 5%.
Yeah, that spreadsheet, it takes a lot into consideration, so everything goes through there.
The FEMA, if they're using that toolkit, it certainly is that.
Yeah, but I think
that
what she was talking
incorporates,
about was
yeah.
on the ranking spreadsheet, the
Yeah.
one I just had pulled up, and you can go through there, Neffy, and you can see all the different
Yeah.
the scoring factors for each one, and you can kind of see which ones really drive the score.
Yeah,
And-
and Ron, you should know that the reason why I'm particularly asking for that is because in the committee that we're working on, that is going to be a factor that the city is looking at. Looking at the different, certainly the BCA and how to incorporate that into. So thank you.
Absolutely. So then moving on, so this is the not the rankings, but the total number of FMPs for some selected areas throughout the region, and here were some of the top ranking projects. Concepcion drove that because of the structure count, Neffy. That's the big thing that drove it, right? That was obvious. Southwell was another one that scored really high. I can tell you now, though, that after, like, a good example, after our proposed scoring, the Southwell makes it into the top 10. So, and significantly improves ceiling and a couple others that have a lot more inundated roadway, right? So that inundated roadway component that needs to be updated. Several of these really go a lot higher, but you know, several. Dave will be highly thankful that we got some of those. Yeah. And I didn't include those here because nothing's official with that yet. And so before we got anyone's hope up too much, we're really confident that that's going to change. But I want to wait until we get official word that it's going to change. And then as soon as we get word on that, I will bring back the new rankings for y'all to look at, especially the changes, the one that really scored up there.
Ron,
So,
a question for clarification.
Yes.
I know Mr. Carroll here is getting really excited about
all those projects that he sees up there.
Getting up there, and but this does mean, and just to be clear, that does mean he still needs to apply for that funding grant, for that funding money, and because the project is on this list, the water board or whoever the state grant agency it's eligible for funding. Versus if he found another low water crossing or another project that was not on the list, that would not be eligible. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. The first round of funding, the first round of applications are done. We know that they've gone out for RFIs. So we think that they're coming close to selections. We anticipate that those selections should happen potentially by the end of the year, or notifications by the end of the year, potentially the first part of next year, and those will start the grant process. There's a lot that goes into that, right? You really go into the whole back end of the grant process, but the first part of the grant process will be done pretty shortly. We believe it's with the board, but yes, number one, you have to be in the flood plan, and number two, you have to submit.
And to be clear, this is for fifth?
For fifth, yes, Water Development Board fifth funding. Yes.
And I don't think, to Suzanne's point, this list is independent of any of the bridged applications that were submitted, right?
Absolutely. We don't know. Those didn't go through us, so I can't tell you. No, that's not public.
No,
Correct.
TWDB has not released information on the abridged applications that were received as part of this round of the Flood Infrastructure Fund grant applications. So we don't have that information. There haven't been rejections of abridged applications either moving into this next round. That's what Ron was alluding to when he talked about hopefully by the end of the year or early into next year, knowing more about this round of FIF funding. So none of that information is public. What this is here is looking at the state flood plan, the rankings of all of the FMXs, those flood risk reduction solutions that we submitted in the 2023 plan. This is just the rankings for all of those, how those ended up essentially ranked and scored into the entire state's plan. And so this, unfortunately, we don't have any indication as to who has submitted a FMP or an FME as if that project would receive funding, when any of that is not that's not public. I don't think that's even decided at this time.
Well, and just something that Neffy said a few minutes ago, if a project's not in the plan right now, we had all those, this group had all those conversations earlier this year about, it's a 5-year cycle that we're now starting. When are the windows going to open? And we got some answers on that, and we don't have to wait 5 years for the next thing. And so I think that's part of, our mission as we go forward, is reaching out to not only the entities that submitted, but the ones that didn't, and say, okay, what's new? What did you not put in for whatever reason the last time? They need to be brought forward, which I think is really important.
And absolutely, if you don't want to wait until 3 or 4 cycles down the road, you're going to have to get into the amended plan. In the amended plan, we will have to have those. It's due to the Water Development Board by April 1st, so we can work backwards to know that we would need it. Y'all have to approve it. We have to be able to present it, make sure it has all the information, be able to provide the amendment. Y'all have to approve it. So, we'd have to work back a couple of months. So,
Are we going to set a schedule for that and then put that out to the communities to say, there's an amendment process?
Yes.
This is what Region 12 is going to
The
require.
word needs to go out, I'll say more informally, if you will. We can send out stuff. We don't have a full schedule yet. We need to come up with that for our next meeting. But the word needs to start going out now to start preparing your information, because we're probably in the approval process in March.
At the latest.
But y'all would have to do all
Well,
your analysis.
we're finalizing approval.
Yes. So,
but that's the first window.
Yeah. So we're looking right after the first of the year, January, February, where we're going to start needing that information so we can get it, put an actual amendment. Because if we don't receive anything, we don't put anything together. But if we do receive any projects, then you have to put an amendment together, and that amendment will include, they put out a sample amendment to go by. So.
One question I actually had for you, Ron, is the refinement of things that are already in the plan. Is that the same timeline? So is the intent, if new information has become available for Bernie's project number 15 we see on the screen, that would make it more, potentially go higher up, is that this is the same timeline to get that amended project also revisited?
If you want anything to change with your project, the consideration for scoring more information, better information, new modeling, anything that could come of that, right? Then yes. Or it'll have to wait till after this plan is in, and so funding would be post 2028 that you'd be eligible for.
Right.
What about just increases in construction cost over time? Does each community need to update our construction costs? Or is that something you'll do for the entire list, just as this construction costs go crazy?
So it is a little bit confusing. So if you remember, we brought everything back to 2020 costs. So all the costs that you see here are in 2020 costs. That's to put everything on the same playing field, right? Ball field. And so through the RFI process, that's when once you submit this, they're going through it. Once they come through the RFI process, they're saying, is your project still going to cost you $8 million? And that's when you say, no, it's going to cost us 10. And they're refining that. So it happens during that process.
So the cynical part of me says, when you were like saying, we think with, I know it's a guess, the top 100 or so will get funding. Is that based on 2020 funding, or if it's these adjusted numbers that reflect the reality we're currently in, that number is not going to be 100, it's going to be 80 or 70?
I think so. So when you do the first bridge applications, I think that goes into consideration. I think they put it in there. I've slept since I've seen my last one a few months ago. So, but I think that some of that increase, you do put those increases in there. You assume a 5% increase for how many years.
So you think even with the cost increases, your swag of 100, top 100 is still valid? Swag
plus or minus 25? Is that too much?
I feel so confident now.
I think, Derek, the big thing of that is which one of these mega projects is going to get funded. You know what I'm saying? I mean, which one of these is going to have? I mean, you go in and you grab a couple of Concepcion Creeks, and that eats into money really quick. And so I know some of those are rated really high, but how many of those are actually got applied for? How many? It's a shot in the dark because we don't know. How many? Some of these coastal projects in Houston could eat the whole budget. So. Yes. So one of the things is the communities have to be ready to match, whether it is an FME or an FMP. There's a certain, unless they're getting 100% grant, which is based on AMI and a bunch of different things. But for the most part, cities are having to match, probably 25% or so. So on a $175 million project, 25% is still a large chunk of money, and not everyone is ready to take that on. So they're having to figure out how they're doing that and coming up with funding plans. And I know some communities are looking to other jurisdictions, and they're trying to come up with ways to fund these big projects.
I have an interesting question. I don't know if the board has even talked about this, but here locally we had a very interesting lesson learned where the county, back when you did your big program, requested projects, and I know from the city and other communities, and some of those projects were proposed to the county, and when the county went in to actually do a little bit more detailed analysis, it turned out that, well, if only you remap it, everything's going to work out. Because some of these projects were maybe not the best PER, preliminary engineering report, done initially, how is the board, or how has there been any indication on their kind of how they're going to deal with that when they come across a project that maybe the solution is something a lot easier, or it's maybe a lot more complex than what originally was proposed? Has there been any discussion about the scope of the change of scope in those projects?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, right? Because it's inevitable that we all know. I mean, many of y'all sit on the board of the bond projects, and some of the bond projects, right, are those have had pretty good studies, and you get into it, and just as you boil down to it, I mean, think about how many times projects have changed just because you get better and more information. And I think that's just something that has to be worked through with the board. I don't know how they're going to handle it. I think that's a great question, and I think that's probably a lot of, they're going to have to figure that out on the fly. I don't know of anything that they've had those conversations about how we're going to do that, but I think that's why they're really asking us to do our due diligence in here to make sure that it does and doesn't do a few things, right? You don't have the downstream impact. You need to certify it doesn't have those downstream impacts, and you need to certify that you have improvements, it meets these different criteria. And I think they're expecting the group to massage that out a little bit. But some of these, I think a lot of the projects in Region 12 have been vetted quite a bit, right? And so a lot of these projects that we're looking at on this list have had some PERs or beyond. But I think that there's other regions where you're absolutely right, where they might have been 20 or 30-year-old projects that have just been pushed along because the small communities didn't have anything better, and have that, nor have they had the money. And so, could there be a different solution? Absolutely. And how they're going to handle that, I think some of that flushes itself out in the application process, because you have to put in a lot of information. You have to give them a lot more data. It's the first application process is kind of just eligibility, making sure you got all your ducks in a row, and then the second part is when you got to really start where the rubber meets the road. How are you going to fund it? How are you going to, more details on the project, digging into the BCA, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, I'm just on that spreadsheet that you could rank, that you can, filter. Do you recall what are the top 10 projects statewide that were ranked?
I used to know at one time. We can go back and look at it if you like. I can pull it up. That's a quick thing, but
I'm just curious if, they're all, like you were saying earlier, if 5 of the top 10 are big Houston projects, for example, just using what you said earlier, they're going to take it by rank and not necessarily by trying to have some investment on the 5th throughout the state, like geographic, what's the word I'm looking for?
That's the $1 million question, Suzanne. It really
sort of
is.
Spreading it out, spreading the wealth out a little bit more instead of it all being in one. Politically.
I'm sure Anita is listening and taking notes.
Yeah, I'm just curious if how that's going to work. Is it going to be strictly because they've had to do this with Swift as well, and I'm just curious with Swift, do they just take those top projects regardless of geographic location? And is the same? I'm just curious how.
My guess is that was probably how the first rattle out of the bucket went, and I think I don't know the numbers. It may be a good representation after they. I think the biggest thing is kind of what we alluded to is who applied, and
right, sure. No,
are they ready to fund that mega project?
Yeah. I'm just just looking at the top ones. I'm just curious if that I was looking for distribution, geographic distribution was the word I was trying to.
But Suzanne, it's kind of like our list here locally. Yeah. If we think about it, and I'm not going to ask the agencies, but if we look at our list right now, which ones did we even apply for? Exactly. So we could have ranked, Conception Creek could be ranked number 1, but if nobody applied for it, it doesn't matter, right? Right. So
no, I agree. I get it. I understand.
You do. I think there's a lot of questions. Yeah. And I think all the points that we've been talking about are valid. And I'm confident Anita's going to take that back to TWDB, and as they go through this evaluation process, and just trying to figure out how it's going to work. Yeah. We all, I'm sure there are plenty of opinions out there on ways to do this, and it's not. I frankly don't envy the Water Development Board for having to wrestle with this. But whether you put in your Region 12 hat or your role, your day-to-day role, I would encourage you to reach out to them, through the channels or through your delegation or whatever the appropriate methods are to have your voice heard. If you have specific concerns about this, we're happy to relay them. And at Sarah as the administrative agent for Region 12, if you want to do that, we are more than happy to take those in and pass them along too. But it's I don't know, that's a big knot to untangle.
Yeah. So see, Suzanne, the Coastal Spine project is on there, and that's $2.3 billion. So, how they're going to handle that, I don't even know. And, part of that is I think just because it's $2.3 billion, I think they could put in an application for less than that, for a portion of that, maybe for the design of that, maybe for the study of that. I guess this is the FME, this is the FMP spreadsheet. So it could be for a portion of it, not the whole thing. you could phase it. But this is the top 10 here. So it does look a little bit spread out. Wichita Falls, Fort Worth, Jefferson County, Harris County, Gulf Coast, Crystal City. That one's close to home. Brownsville. So a little bit spread out. And that's a big number on it there. Oh yeah, there's the Galveston Bay storm surge is really big. So we know that that's not. So how they're going to handle those, Suzanne? I don't know.
Yeah, I get it.
But just from the number of RFIs that I've heard of out there, there's more than those two projects.
Sure.
More than two, less than 100 maybe, and there may be more. I don't know. We'll see.
Look, they're going to be building levees, Derek.
Very excited. In my old world, yes.
Well, like you mentioned before, even though these are the top 10 or 13 projects, there's no indication that abridged applications even went in for those. Right. And of the abridged applications that went in, there are different levels of federal participation based on any number of factors. Most of it, your demographic income of that area.
Right. Okay, good.
I think that was all for me, unless there's any more questions.
Hey, Ron, are you there? Can you hear me? Can you hear me, guys?
Yes, sir.
Hey, this is Todd. I'm remote right now. So when I was, filling out the application for the FMEs and FMPs, what was killing me on the FMPs for Bexar County was the grant qualifier criterion that's in the IUP, the Flood Intended Use Plan. And what was really the driving factor was the average median household income. That was kind of what was killing my projects to apply for in the FMPs. I'm wondering, you see what I'm saying with that? I'm thinking there had to be other people that are having the same issue.
Yes, Todd, there was, and I know all of that's going to be taken into consideration. I think there's going to be. I think that the Water Development Board is probably going to be looking for feedback after this first application. I think a lot's going to have to. They have to roll this out. They have to do one. In order for this to be successful, they need to tell some success stories, and they need to do some lessons learned, and they need to make this process usable for all. And so I think that. We're all going through this at the same time, trying to learn, trying to figure it out. So hopefully the process gets improved, and hopefully more of your projects are available, Todd. But if we have as part of the group, the team here has heard that, the planning group has heard that, and I think if I would say if we get to that's something we can voice up to the board.
All right. Hey, thanks, Ron. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Awesome. We're good. Thank you. Kendall, what do you need back?
All right. Thanks, Ron. And again, I would just encourage, all the members of the group and your contacts and relationships, start reaching out to them. First, let them know about the window is going to open again. So if they have potential projects, please let them know that we'll be looking for those inputs, or if they want to amend something. But then next, if you have thoughts or concerns or whatever it might be, questions for the Water Development Board as they go through their process, deliver to Ron, deliver to Kendall. We can consolidate them, or you can reach out directly, in your other roles. But I think it's important just to know that information and communication is pretty critical right now. Yeah, Debbie.
Just a question, if you thought it might have value to go ahead and send out to folks, and especially that have already submitted projects that may not be ranking so high, highly.
Yeah.
And some pointers on how to increase that ranking. And of course, green infrastructure and social vulnerability would be.
Well, I was even thinking just almost like a save the date sort of email of just the window is going to open, and just to get that notice out while we figure out what maybe some more specifics would be. But that would be my first inclination, is to get something like that out there to that list of folks that we have.
And let them know how small that window is.
Yeah,
Short.
exactly. All right, we're going to move on to item 9. Kendall, do we have any public comments?
No, sir. No one has signed up to speak.
All right, thank you. Moving on to item 10, date and potential agenda items for the next meeting. We were looking at early, mid-December, at least get past Thanksgiving. We should have our consultant, HDR, under contract at that time. We're going to need to discuss the amendment process for all these things that we've just been talking about. Talk about if there's any new information from Water Development Board on the FIF applications and anything else that they've shared and come up with. So those are big. And then, well, let's set our meeting, and then we've got one last topic. Kendall, did you have any suggested dates that you wanted to pose or put out there for the group?
No, sir. If Tuesday and Thursday afternoons are working well for the group, we can absolutely.
Yeah, I would do it as early, and we're only in October right now. We're already pushing this thing till December. I would do it.
I was going to say the 3rd.
Yeah, the 3rd or 5th.
3rd or 5th. How are we looking? Is any major concerns with either of those, or a preference?
3rd is my preference. It's Kara.
Okay. 3rd, but a little bit later in the afternoon, Suzanne? Okay. So general consensus on December 3rd, Tuesday at 3 p.m. And we'll also, as always, have the hybrid virtual option. Okay. Thanks, y'all. And just as an FYI, because there's actually a lot of overlap between Region 12 and the City of San Antonio Stormwater Advisory Committee. So right now we are, I think, scheduled Region 12, which will be Sarah's staff, to give, and I'm going to rope in HDR too, but to give the city's Stormwater Advisory Committee an update on Region 12 on December 17th. December 17th. So that's just an FYI. And Ron, mark your calendar. No holiday parties are allowed to be scheduled for that time. Anything else?
Yeah, I just had a quick question for some of our technical folks. So maybe Aaron, you or Ron. I was looking at an email I guess I got from the ASFPM, I guess, who was setting their annual meeting, and they had some mention in there about a discussion about new Atlas 15 data sets. Do you know anything about that? It seems odd that we had the same rainfall intensity data for 30 years, and then all of a sudden, within a span of 5, we're looking at already an update.
So they've rolled it out like Montana or somewhere, and they're working on future volumes. But I think they were reacting, or I want to say Congress mandated that they update it every 5 years after what happened when they did the Atlas 14. So it's going to be an ongoing thing. And then part of, I think there are 2 volumes, and one of those volumes is expected to include future climate. I know it's your favorite.
But I'm sorry, but also to clarify, Dave, in Atlas 14, one of the reasons why Texas was we were one of the later states to adopt it is because it has to be sponsored locally. So the state had not provided their in-kind money to do that update. So once Texas did, then NOAA was able to update that information. So Atlas 15 is going to be the same thing, where it'll be the state that has to provide some funding to get that study completed here. So there's also some of that, local sponsor and so forth. So there was some of that as well.
And I think you saw the big drive because there was such a drastic change between what we had previously, what we had before, and we think a lot of that was driven by the hurricane. All those hurricanes, all those storms that hit the coast and drove, and that's why another reason why we kept getting delayed, because we kept getting more information, and I think we've been in a drought since that hit. So I don't know how much rainfall data would change. May go back down, Dave. I don't know.
All right. Well, with that, we're wrapped up. Can I get a motion and a second to adjourn, please?
Dave Wegan, motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you, everybody.